We silence ourselves, not because we're weak, but because we've been taught that peace means pleasing others. But silence has a cost. It buries your truth. It's time to listen to the voice within and reclaim your power. Reclaim your power. You can scream in silence and no one will hear you. It's one of the quietest kinds of pain a woman can live through. You wake up beside someone you once prayed for, and yet your heart feels like it's living behind glass. You smile, you nod, you say you're fine, but deep down, there's a trembling in your chest, a knowing that something inside you is slowly breaking. Women learn early how to hold their pain beautifully. You learn how to cry quietly in bathrooms, how to fix your face before walking back into the room, how to pretend it's not as bad as it feels. You master the art of endurance, keeping everything together so no one sees how close you are to falling apart. Because being strong starts to mean being silent, you tell yourself stories to survive. He's just stressed. It's just a phase. Maybe I'm expecting too much each time. You swallow your truth like it's medicine, but it doesn't heal you. It numbs you. You start to confuse peace with avoidance, love with tolerance, silence with safety, and here's where the paradox begins. You think staying quiet keeps the peace, but the longer you stay silent, the louder the noise becomes inside you. It's the sound of all the words you never said, the boundaries you never drew, the apologies you gave when you weren't wrong, the pieces of yourself you traded for temporary calm. You begin to disappear slowly, not in one dramatic moment, but in small, unnoticeable ways. You stop laughing the way you used to. You second-guess your tone. You start walking on eggshells in your own life. And somehow, you start believing that this quiet version of you is easier to love. But here's the truth most women never admit out loud. Silence isn't weakness. It's survival. It's the body's instinct to protect you from emotional danger, to avoid rejection, conflict, abandonment. You stay silent, not because you have no voice, but because the world taught you that your voice comes with consequences. So you hold your breath in conversations that pierce your spirit. You play small so someone else can feel big. You pretend it doesn't hurt because you don't want to seem too much. And yet, every unspoken word weighs heavier on your soul. But silence isn't peace. It's self-erasure disguised as calm. And deep down, you know it, you feel it. You can sense the slow fading of your fire. So let me ask you, what happens to a woman when silence becomes her language of survival? What does it do to her mind, her body, her spirit? That's where the story begins, not in the noise, but in the quiet, a dinner table lit by the warm glow of candles, glasses half full, the sound of laughter rippling through the room, except one kind of laughter doesn't sound right. A woman sits there, smiling, even as her stomach tightens. Her partner makes a joke, a soft jab, a subtle humiliation disguised as humor. Everyone chuckles, she does too. But only she feels the sting underneath it. Her fingers tighten around her fork. She laughs softly, eyes down, hoping no one sees the flicker of hurt across her face. The air feels heavier now. The sound of clinking cutlery suddenly grows loud, almost metallic, as if every scrape is echoing the ache inside her chest. She scans the faces around her. No one notices. No one stops him. No one defends her. So she swallows the moment like a bitter pill. It's fine, she tells herself. It's not worth making a scene, because that's what women are taught to do, isn't it? To keep the evening smooth, to keep the energy light, to be understanding, forgiving, graceful, even when their dignity is quietly slipping through their fingers. The dinner ends, the laughter fades, the dishes are cleared, and yet the words stay, replaying over and over, like a splinter she can't pull out. She lies awake later that night, eyes open in the dark, thinking maybe she did overreact, maybe she is too sensitive, Maybe it really was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. It was a moment where she betrayed her own truth to protect someone else's comfort. Every woman has lived some version of that dinner table moment. The setting changes. Maybe it's a car ride, a phone call, a family gathering, but the ache is the same. That slow, invisible shrinking of self, that quiet deal you make with your pain. I'll stay silent if it keeps the peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace. It's emotional suffocation. And over time, the price of that silence becomes too heavy. You begin to lose the sound of your own voice. You begin to question what's real, what's right, what's worth speaking up for. You tell yourself it's not about fear, but deep down, it is fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as difficult. You convince yourself that silence keeps you safe, when in truth, it only keeps you small. And the saddest part? You start to wear that silence like a second skin. It becomes so familiar that you almost forget it's not who you truly are. But here's the real question, one that lingers long after the laughter dies down and the night grows quiet. Why does silence feel safer than truth, even when it's slowly breaking you? The silence of women in toxic relationships is rarely born from weakness. It's an inheritance, one that begins in girlhood, long before love ever breaks your heart. Women are taught early how to be good, to be polite, patient, soft-spoken. You learn that kindness is currency, that if you're agreeable enough, quiet enough, forgiving enough, you'll be loved. You're praised for being understanding, for keeping the peace, for being the one who doesn't make things harder. And without realizing it, that conditioning starts weaving itself into your sense of identity. So when conflict comes, your instinct isn't to speak, it's to fix. You rush to soothe the tension. Even when you didn't cause it, you apologize first. Even when you were the one hurt, you silence your truth to keep the peace, believing that peace is love. But here's what no one tells you. That kind of peace costs you your power. Every time you bite your tongue to avoid making someone uncomfortable, your nervous system records it as success, danger avoided, safety achieved. You teach your brain that silence is protection. And with repetition, that instinct becomes a pattern, one that feels like safety, but is actually self-abandonment. You start believing that the only way to be loved is to be easy to love, that your softness is what makes you worthy, that if you're calm, patient, and forgiving enough, they'll see your value. But that belief keeps you stuck, because silence doesn't earn love. It only teaches people they can hurt you without consequence. This is emotional survival masquerading as love. Your silence is the armor you wear to stay close to someone who might leave if you spoke your truth. And it works, temporarily, until the silence begins to ache, until the quiet starts to feel like suffocation. Because silence doesn't keep you safe, it keeps you small. It convinces you that staying invisible is the price of being accepted. But the more you shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort, the more you lose sight of who you are. And deep down, you know something's off. You can feel the quiet rebellion of your own spirit, the part of you that's tired of being understanding, tired of walking on eggshells, tired of swallowing pain just to keep love alive. So the question becomes, if silence is the shield, what are the invisible patterns that keep you trapped beneath it? What are the emotional reflexes, the quiet ones, that keep women suffering even when they know something inside is deeply wrong? Because that's where the real story begins, in the unseen patterns that bind you long after the noise is gone. There are patterns that live quietly inside so many women, reflexes shaped not by weakness, but by love that was never returned in the way it deserved to be. You learn them without realizing it. You repeat them because they feel familiar, and before you know it, they start to define how you show up in love, not freely, but fearfully. The first is the caretaker reflex. You've been taught to believe that if you just love harder, He'll finally become the man you know he could be. You sense his pain, his frustration, his wounds, and instead of protecting your own heart, you start trying to heal his. You become his emotional nurse, tending to his chaos while yours quietly festers in the background. You tell yourself you're helping, but really, you're performing emotional CPR on someone who refuses to breathe on their own. And every time he pulls away or hurts you, you love harder, because that's what you were conditioned to do. You mistake overfunctioning for devotion. You confuse exhaustion for effort, until love stops feeling like warmth and starts feeling like work. Love becomes labor, and silence becomes the cost of keeping the illusion of peace. But peace built on silence always cracks. Then comes the fear of abandonment, the one that lives deep in your chest, the one that whispers every time you think about speaking up. What if he leaves? What if I end up alone? It's the fear that your truth might cost you the very love you're fighting to keep. So you stay quiet, hoping your silence will hold everything together. But silence doesn't stop the loss. It just delays it. Because the moment you silence your truth to keep someone, you've already begun losing yourself. You tell yourself, I can handle it, as if loneliness with someone is less painful than loneliness on your own. But you can't soothe emptiness with proximity. You can't fill yourself by disappearing. And then, the quietest one of all, shame and self-doubt. This is where the erosion begins. Toxic love doesn't always break you loudly. Sometimes it wears you down slowly. A sarcastic comment here, a forgotten promise there, the subtle twisting of your words until you start questioning your memory, gaslighting, manipulation. The kind of confusion that makes you ask, am I crazy? You start to believe you're the problem. Maybe I am too emotional. Maybe I do expect too much. And little by little, you start editing yourself. You stop sharing what hurts because you don't trust your own pain. You begin to think silence is safer than being dismissed, safer than being called dramatic, safer than being told you're wrong again. But here's the truth. Each of these patterns, the caretaking, the fear, the shame, they aren't who you are. They're survival mechanisms. They were built to protect you from rejection, from loss, from the unbearable pain of feeling unworthy. And yet, they trap you in the very suffering you're trying to avoid. Because the more you silence yourself, the more invisible you become still. Beneath all this conditioning, there lies something even deeper, a darker, quieter force that keeps women silent far longer than fear alone ever could. It's not just about avoiding conflict. It's about control, the kind so subtle you barely see it happening. And that's where the truth begins to turn toward something far more insidious. There's a haunting paradox women rarely talk about. The silence you believe protects you is the same silence that holds you captive. You tell yourself you're avoiding conflict, that peace is worth more than being heard. But the truth is that peace is often a performance, one that costs you your voice, your needs, and sometimes your sense of self. For many women, silence starts as a form of survival. It's the pause you take when he raises his voice, the deep breath you hold instead of explaining yourself again, the careful tone you adopt so he won't misunderstand. You learn to make your love quieter, softer, hoping it will be enough to stop the storm. But silence, in these moments, is not neutral. It doesn't just float in the air. It fills the space where your boundaries should be. In toxic dynamics, silence becomes a kind of currency, one that benefits the person who holds more power. Your quiet compliance keeps the balance tilted in their favor. They learn that they can wound you, dismiss you, or ignore you, and you'll fold inwards instead of confronting it. Your silence becomes their comfort. It tells them, she won't leave, she won't fight back. She'll keep absorbing what I give. But here's where it gets darker. Silence doesn't just protect their comfort. Over time, It starts to shape your identity. You begin to monitor your tone before you speak. You edit your truth before it leaves your lips. You question whether your feelings are too much, whether your needs are valid, whether you even have the right to take up emotional space. And so, without meaning to, you begin policing yourself. You become your own warden, guarding your voice as if it's dangerous. It's subtle but powerful, the way silence turns inward. What began as protection from someone else's reaction becomes protection from your own authenticity. You start anticipating rejection before it happens. You quiet your laughter before anyone tells you you're too loud. You hide your disappointment before anyone can call you dramatic. The silence that once came from fear of him now comes from fear of yourself, of what might happen if you spoke, the truth that burns in your chest. And this is the hidden truth. Silence isn't just something done to you. It becomes something you do to yourself, unknowingly, repeatedly, until your own voice feels foreign, until the woman staring back at you in the mirror seems distant, as if her thoughts no longer belong to her. But silence can be unlearned, because your voice, the one you once buried under fear, was never lost. It's been waiting beneath the quiet, patient and powerful, ready to rise again. The question now is, how do you reclaim your voice without burning your world down? Women are taught to survive silence long before they ever learn to use their voices. For generations, the message has been clear. Stay quiet to keep the peace. Be gentle to be loved. Endure to be worthy. But healing, true healing, begins the moment you realize that your voice is not a weapon. It's a homecoming, reclaiming it isn't about confrontation. It's about restoration. You're not trying to win an argument. You're trying to remember who you are underneath the years of self-censorship and quiet compliance. It starts with honesty. Step 1. Name what's happening. Too many women soften the truth to make it more digestible for others. And even for themselves, you tell yourself he's just stressed, that maybe you're overreacting. That love sometimes feels heavy, but deep down, you know when something isn't love. It's control, neglect, or fear disguised as care. The moment you name it for what it is, the fog begins to lift. When you call emotional control by its name, you make it visible, and what's visible can finally be challenged. Naming your reality is not disloyalty. It's the first act of self-loyalty. Step 2. Validate your feelings. You don't need permission to feel hurt. You don't need a perfect story to justify your pain. So many women wait for proof, for him to admit it, for someone else to see it, before allowing themselves to grieve what they've endured. But your emotions are evidence enough. Begin by writing what you feel, even if it's messy, even if it doesn't make sense yet. Each word you put down bridges the distance between your heart and your truth. You've been silenced for so long that even acknowledging your feelings becomes an act of rebellion, a sacred whisper that says, I exist, and what I feel matters. Step 3. Reconnect to safety within. Silence once served a purpose. It protected you when speaking up felt dangerous. Honor that. Thank the part of you that stayed quiet just to survive. But now, you're building a new kind of safety, one that doesn't require shrinking. Create spaces where your voice feels safe to return. Surround yourself with women who remind you that your truth is not too loud. Seek therapy, sisterhood, community. Any place that reflects back your wholeness. Your voice is sacred. It deserves to live in spaces that don't punish its presence. Step 4. Speak, even softly. You don't need to roar to reclaim your power. Liberation doesn't always sound like thunder. Sometimes it begins as a trembling whisper. The first time you say no, even if your voice shakes, is a revolution. The first time you say, I deserve better, you plant a seed of freedom. Each honest word you speak shifts something inside you. The energy of your life begins to realign with truth. And that's where the transformation begins, not in loudness, but in authenticity, because the moment you start speaking, even if your voice trembles, something deep within you begins to return home, to the woman you were always meant to be. For so long, women have mistaken silence for strength. We were told to hold our tongues, to pick our battles, to keep the peace even when our hearts were breaking. Silence became a shield, a fragile kind of safety we clung to in a world that too often punished our truth. But here's the quiet revolution. The same voice you once buried to survive is the one that will bring you back to life. Because silence may have kept you safe, but your safety now lies in truth. Imagine yourself back at that dinner table, the same room, the same faces, the same uneasy laughter after the same cutting joke. Only this time, you don't shrink, you don't smile through the sting. You look up, meet his eyes, and say softly, "That wasn't funny." The air shifts. The world doesn't collapse. You don't lose love. You reclaim it, beginning with your own. In that moment, you realize healing doesn't need to be loud. It's not found in dramatic exits or perfectly timed revenge. It's found in these quiet, courageous moments, the ones where you choose to honor yourself instead of appeasing someone else. That's how transformation begins, not when you fight to be heard, but when you finally believe that your voice deserves to exist. Every word you speak in truth realigns your life toward authenticity. Every boundary you hold without apology reteaches your nervous system what real safety feels like. You no longer walk on eggshells. You walk in your power, and as you rise, something beautiful happens. Your courage ripples. Every woman who speaks her truth becomes a mirror for another woman still whispering hers. When one woman chooses to use her voice, it sends a quiet permission into the world, a signal that says, "You can too," because collective healing begins with individual honesty. Your story, your boundaries, your truth, they all carry light into someone else's darkness. You are never alone in your silence, and you won't be alone in your awakening. One day, another woman will hear your story, maybe through your words, or through the way you simply live freely. And in that moment, she find the courage to speak hers too. That's how the silence ends, not through noise, but through truth, one brave voice at a time. Your silence was survival. Your voice is freedom.